Sleepwalkers. Welcome to Maniac Movies LLC. I do updates Wednesdays and Fridays. I hate social media, so the only way this gets spread around is if you like, share, and subscribe. All right, let's talk about the other Stephen King cat movie.
Nobody really knows him like his mother.
You cannot be in love with this girl, she looks. You don't know me, Tanya.
But I want to.
Behind their smile is a secret.
Hi.
Come in, Tanya. I have something for you.
I don't know who you are, but I know you're not who you say you are.
It came after both Pet Sematary and it came after Cat's Eye. Now, both Pet Sematary and Cat's Eye. Well, Pet Sematary was actually a massive hit when it was released, but and Cat's Eyes did okay. And Cat's Eyes was an anthology, but it had the wraparound story with the cat. And I think all the stories in that involved a cat. I think they did, or at least involved a cat in some way. But yeah, and then Pet Sematary obviously very prominently featured a cat, and then there came Sleepwalkers. So Sleepwalkers was the first movie that Stephen King ever wrote specifically for the screen. It wasn't ever a short story or a book. It had never been published beforehand. So that made it kind of unique, and it was something that he had director approval. He had a lot of power because he was so massively successful in the 80s. So the original director he had fired, and he had Mick Garris hired. Mick Garris, who had done Psycho 4, which he was impressed with. So at this point, Mick Garris had really only had one theatrical film, Critters 2, which I think was called The Second Course. And to date, as far as I'm aware, and my research shows, Mick Garris has had two theatrical films, Critters 2 and Sleepwalkers. See, the weird thing about that is that Sleepwalkers was actually a big hit when it was released, but it got terrible reviews. And even to this day, when people talk about bad Stephen King movies, Sleepwalkers tends to come up. I don't think that's fair. This has been, I won't really say a guilty pleasure because it's not like I'm embarrassed I like it, but this has been a movie I really enjoy watching since I was a little kid. And I haven't watched this for a long time, but the thing about this movie is it has outstanding pacing. Like, this flick is just one of those movies that flies by like that. You start and it feels like 10 minutes have passed and you're like, oh wow, this is almost over. It's a very fast-paced, fun creature feature. Now, it is flawed. It is certainly flawed from blurry, bad CGI effects that the early 90s just couldn't sustain. I mean, they just shouldn't have done it because the 90s, mid-90s CGI was bad, and this is early 90s CGI. It's really bad. And, of course, there's some really ill-placed humor. This has some one-liners. Just think of yourself as lunch. Hey, Ma! Just shit that kind of makes you cringe and makes you think, okay, so did Stephen King write this, or did the guy who wrote Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child, write this? And I do wonder if there was some studio interference here, because there's a couple of things that just really do feel beneath Stephen King, like Death by Corn on the Cob. Now, I honestly don't know how hard the cob of corn on the cob is, but it feels like it would be nearly impossible to shove that through a human being's body, no matter how strong you are. But whatever. So the Sleepwalker is a monster Stephen King invented for this, and he gives us a nice little definition at the beginning of the movie. But it's a creature that came forth from the breeding of human and feline. So, and the opening titles of this are actually really cool because they show through a series of pictures the way the two species kind of interbred. So not like people fucking cats, but just showing people and cats and the intermingled family lineage of the two. So you get a cold open with a cameo by Mark Hamil and Luke Skywalker himself. And for the love of God, why in 1992 did Mark Hamill look old enough to play Harrison Ford's dad? Like, Mark Hamill aged badly. But, Mark Hamill's a sheriff, and there's this mysterious house that everyone's worried about because the trees are full of mutilated dead cats. This is an interesting movie for animal lovers, by the way, because cats are both the heroes and the victims in this movie. This is probably some of the most heroic action you'll ever see from cats, but also probably has the most cats murdered on screen in graphic detail. So it's a bit of a wash for animal lovers, and I like cats. But so they search the house, and then they're all like, they find this dead body in a really cheap jump scare because the girl is mummified. She's long dead, and you hear it does the thing where they open the door and the body flies out of the damn closet like someone shoved it, because they probably did off camera. And they even inserted a little screaming sound to make sure we understand that this is supposed to be a jump scare. But aside from that, and one later jump scare that's actually a dream sequence, this movie's pretty good on not having cringy jump scares, at least. But yeah, so it establishes that, they sucked this little girl dry. Like, this is a young girl. You can tell she still got braces, which was a nice touch. And whatever they did to her made her look like a mummified corpse, like a 1,000-year-old dead body. Then we cut to Charles, played by Brian Krause, I think is how you pronounce his name. He's best known for starring in the original version of that TV show with the young female witches, Charmed. He was their guardian angel, basically. Him. But that's more or less where his career peaked. Aside from that, he's been in some Z-grade horror movies. He was in a movie called Triloquist, like Ventriloquist, that I believe was from the director of the original Leprechaun movie. And I still remember this. They spelled his name wrong on the DVD box. I thought that was pretty funny. But Brian Krause is looking at this girl of his, looking through a yearbook. He's drawn a little heart around this girl he has a crush on. And he proceeds, her name is Tina, and he proceeds to cut a T into his arm, because that's what you do. And then he has to wipe it up with a tissue, and it's pretty clear that Stephen King was trying to draw a parallel between jacking off, wiping it up with a tissue, versus self-mutilation, wiping it up with a tissue, teenage boys. So you get right off the bat, this guy's not normal. And he gets much less normal when you see him interact with his mother. I guess that's why they chose Mick Garris. He had a history of dealing with unusual relationships between boys and their mothers, Psycho 4. So we see him interact with his mom, played by Alice Krige. Alice Krige, Krieg, I don't know, Krige. She's best known for Ghost Story, the early 80s horror story where she was the ghost, the vengeful spirit, and haunting the son of one of these old pricks, old rich guys that had killed her. And Star Trek First Contact, where she was the Queen Borg. And that was a really cool character. I'm not even a Trekkie. I don't really like Star Trek, but that was a cool movie, and she looked awesome in that movie. But she's very good in this as well. And the first thing I thought was, they don't look that many years apart. Like, she doesn't look that much older than him. And she's not. She's only actually 15 years older than the guy playing her son. Which is right in the realm of, yeah, that's possible. But then again, we have no idea how old these things are. Like, they're shapeshifters, so they could be 1,000, they could be 10. Like, there's actually a visual cue in this movie that suggests Brian Krause's character Charles might actually be only about 10 or 12 years old when he gets startled by a cat, because the Sleepwalkers are terribly afraid of cats. Cats are essentially the only thing that can really hurt them. And his face morphs into a few different things, including a 12-year-old boy. So their age is negligible at best. And I was watching this thinking, well, maybe they're not really supposed to be mother and son. Maybe that's just their cover. But they keep it up for so long. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they're mother and son. And they're banging. I don't know if that's a trait of the Sleepwalkers. Like, they don't frown on incest. They don't frown on incest, or if they're trying to propagate because their species is so burnt down that it suggests that these may be the last two, so they're just trying to reproduce so there's more Sleepwalkers. It doesn't specifically say, and it doesn't specifically say, could be applied to a lot of stuff about the Sleepwalkers, like what are the limitations of their powers or how invulnerable they are. So, or why do cats hate them if they're descended from cats? Because cats hate these things. They gather in their yard in numbers, and they're terrified of cats because cats are the only thing that can really hurt them. So, but they feed on the essence of teenage virgins. Gotta be a virgin. So Charles, apparently their modus operandi, the way they operate, is that Charles kind of assimilates himself into a high school as a handsome young blonde guy. This guy looks like Zach Morris from Saved by the Bell. So, awesome car too. So it never hurts picking up girls when you have a nice car. So, he just kind of works his way into a school, kind of sniffs out, tries to find a pretty virgin, and then he seduces her and steals her life essence and splits it with his mom. Now, this process may seem unnecessarily complicated for creatures that are as powerful as the Sleepwalkers seem to be, but that's one of those don't worry about it things that makes me think that this would have worked better if it had either been longer or had actually been a short story where Stephen King could have just filled in the gaps, like, the Sleepwalkers can only do this through this, So, yeah, you do feel like you're missing some backstory here on these things. But, there's a scene early on where he's developed a crush on Tina, played by Madchen Amick. I don't know how to pronounce her name. But she's from Twin Peaks. So, and even though she's in her 20s, she's playing a girl that I think is only 15 or younger, maybe, because she doesn't seem to drive, and her curfew is 5 p.m. Whose curfew is 5 p.m.? But, sure. So, but the actress is good. She's just obviously too old for the role. But, yeah, so he's trying to seduce her, and the mom is getting jealous, and hungry because apparently she hasn't eaten in a while. And then there's other little issues going on in the background because these people are changing identities. They're stealing identities. Maybe it doesn't really say, but it does say that he lied in his transcripts to get into the school. And the person who finds out is creepy teacher played by Otho from Beetlejuice. Remember Otho from Beetlejuice, the fake ass hipster douchebag fat pseudo psychic? And that guy's actually done a lot of voice work. He was even the mayor in Nightmare Before Christmas, and he's passed on now, which wasn't a surprise given that he was overweight and he wasn't young in this movie. But and there's also a cop, Officer Andy, who's played by an actor I am not super familiar with. He's been in a lot of stuff, but he hasn't ever really been famous. So I recognize him from one of my favorite episodes of Tales from the Crypt, the one with the lumberjacks. But he's also got Officer Andy on his back because Officer Andy caught him speeding. And rather than just eat it and take the ticket, he fucks with him and almost runs over a little girl. And to me, that came too early in the movie. Because after he deals with the teacher, you're like, well, the teacher's a prick, so who cares? But when he almost runs over the little kid, it's like, okay, this guy's just straight up evil. There's no more question as to what he's capable of. So, yeah, I thought that one piece of that chase scene where Officer Andy's trying to pull him over probably should have gone, just because it does show you too early that Charles is fully capable of murdering Tina. There's no question. Up until then, you're kind of aligned with Charles, and that's something I sort of like about this movie, is the way, it's a movie where the villains are the leads. I mean, Charles and his mother are the leads of the movie. They are what propels the story, and we're aligned with them and their perspective. But also, it's a movie that keeps changing hands, so you really don't know who you're following here. Like I said, Officer Andy feels like the hero of the movie. He's this likable small-town cop who is trying to break this case, but in fact, Officer Andy's cat, Clovis the Attack Cat, that's actually what it says on his collar, I noticed that this time, is the hero of this movie. So, yeah, Charles's mom is getting impatient. Tina's parents are a little leery of Charles, but, they handsome, presumably, they're in the same grade. There's no way anyone would ever buy this guy as being, I guess she's got to be 15 and he's posing as 16, and then they could be in the same grade together, I guess. But, yeah. And from there, the Sleepwalkers pretty much go to war with this town, and that's foreshadowed when Charles is reading this short story he wrote in lit class, where he describes a boy and his mother being driven out of town by an angry mob. So yeah, it's a cool, over-the-top, gory movie with a lot of cats in it. So, apparently this movie had a real hard time getting an R rating, which I can believe, because in the early 90s, the MPAA had already really cracked down hard on horror movies. It was in the late 80s, actually, when they started doing that because of the moral outrage over slasher films. So, the late 80s, it was already getting hard to show really any gore to speak of in a horror flick that actually kind of killed the horror genre. But this movie gets away with a lot, and I gotta think they did so just because this movie had so many people involved with it. And, Stephen King, obviously, and then, but also this has a lot of cameos from famous people. This has a cameo from a lot of directors, actually. John Landis, American Wolf in London, The Blues Brothers, Animal House, and Joe Dante played a couple of lab techs. Joe Dante, who did The Howling and The Burbs. What was the other big one, though? The Howling and, damn, I'm spacing on it. Oh, Gremlins. Joe Dante, director of Gremlins. They play a couple of lab techs, and then in another scene, Clive Barker, author of, writer-director of Hellraiser and Nightbreed, famous author. Stephen King really hyped him up a lot early on in his career. Plays also someone who appears to work with forensics with the cops, but he has a quick scene with Stephen King, who also has a cameo as a skeevy caretaker of a graveyard. Very much in his creep show mode of, hey, it ain't my fault if kids want to break in, and I ain't responsible. That mode of acting from Stephen King. So you do have a scene with Stephen, and you also have Tobe Hooper in that sequence as some sort of criminal forensics guy. Tobe Hooper directs the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Poltergeist. But yeah, so you get a scene with King and Barker talking to each other, and these guys at the time, because Clyde Barker in the early 90s, people assumed he was the next Stephen King. Now Clyde Barker fizzled out pretty quickly, and I love Clyde Barker, so I don't like saying that, but he did. His career peaked almost instantly. So, and King and Clyde Barker, there would be another collaboration with their stories in Quicksilver Highway a few years after this, also directed by Mick Garris. So Mick Garris and Stephen King seem to be buddies, because even though Mick Garris isn't the best filmmaker in the world, not the worst either by any stretch, he's just not great. But he did Quicksilver Highway, which was a made-for-TV movie that adapted a Stephen King story called Teeth and a Clive Barker story called The Body Politic, and that's a fun little made-for-TV movie, actually. He directed The Stand. Mick Garris directed The Stand, one of the most high-profile King TV adaptations of all time. He directed Desperation with Ron Perlman. Ron Perlman also has a weird, random, smallish part in this movie, Sleepwalkers. Ron Perlman has 2 scenes in this movie for some reason. It's just, fuck it. I mean, that's certainly no less random than him playing the goat preacher in The Island of Dr. Moreau. Yeah, he was Sayer of the Law in Island of Dr. Moreau, if you didn't know that. But, Mick Garris also did Desperation with Ron Perlman, and he did A Bag of Bones with Rob Lowe, and he did Quicksilver Highway with Mark Hamil and David Arquette. And I don't think any of those movies touched theaters. Like I said, I don't think Mick Garris has had another theatrical release, or it's certainly not another wide one. And it's kind of unfair, because like I said, he's not a bad filmmaker, and he's also a great friend of the genre. And his love for the genre shows in this movie. He's having fun. This was a popcorn movie. But I like that it's not disposable. It's not low effort. People are trying. There is acting. There are really good makeup effects in this movie. It's paced extremely well. It's got good production values. And we're so deep into the era of the ultra cheap horror movie, where they try to make a whole movie for like $3 million. Thank you, Blumhouse. That it's nice seeing a movie with production values. I mean, we get a car chase. We get some explosions. We get cast probably in the 30s, if not 40s. This isn't a small movie. This isn't one of those movies that's 8 people in a room and then you have maybe one crowd shot in the whole flick. There's a lot of people in this movie. There's a lot of characters in this movie. And that means you have a lot of cannon fodder and you get a really good, ultra over-the-top, violent third act out of this flick. As far as, it's, like I said, the humor is really what hurts this the most, is that those one-liners, man, they do, I mean, I honestly find them kind of funny, but they are silly, and they make it impossible to take this movie seriously. And that's just campiness. It's not something you expect out of Stephen King. It's just not what he's known for. It's not what he does. Even Creepshow really isn't campy. It's a jokey movie, but it's not really a campy movie. Maximum Overdrive is a campy movie. And Maximum Overdrive, even Stephen King has said, was a god-awful movie. Now, I know Maximum Overdrive has a tremendous cult following, but it is not a good film. By no stretch of the imagination is Maximum Overdrive a good film. It's maybe an entertaining movie. I mean, I've seen it a couple times, and I've actually seen the truck from Maximum Overdrive in real life. I saw it at a convention. The thing is massive. But, yeah, it's just, you can't take this movie seriously, but also it's not disposable. I really don't think it's fair to call this a bad movie. I don't. I think its reputation as a bad movie is just kind of one of those internet punching bags where it's easy to throw shit at, because no one's gonna like really hardcore stand for this movie. Like, no, you shut up. I love Sleepwalkers. Like, no one's really gonna do that for this movie. There's a lot of people like me, I think. I mean, this movie did get a collector's edition Blu-ray a couple of years ago. I think there's a lot of people like me who are like, I like Sleepwalkers. It's not a bad movie. But there's, you can trash it because not a lot of people are gonna like, no, that was my favorite movie. I'm like, nah. So, and you can meme on it pretty easy, because like I said, there are certain lines, stabs a cop kebab, that do feel like they're straight out of a really, like Child's Play Part 5 level one-liners, like not Child's Play 1, but like Child's Play 5, like after Chucky's basically just a stand-up comic that kills people. So, yeah, I overall think this is a good one. This is a good nostalgia flick for me too, because like I said, this is one of the movies I remember really liking as a little kid, and I think a lot of this was going way over my head as a little kid, because I probably didn't fully understand that the mother and son were having sex. But interesting, weird movie. You get some good gore. You get a guy's fingers bitten off. You get to see Alice Craig just go buck wild at the end. It's unpredictable too. Like I said, characters that feel very important kind of are very quickly thrown out of this movie. Also, I should mention, speaking of characters that get thrown out of the movie, Madison and Mick's mom, who gets thrown out the window. Now, Madison and Mick's parents in this movie were a real-life married couple, and they were also a married couple in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And they have really good chemistry, and that's kind of what I'm saying about this flick, is that there's not really a throwaway element. I mean, even Ron Perlman, as small as his role is, he's just a state cop who's a complete asshole for no reason. But it gives Ron Perlman a lot to do in his couple of scenes where he's just like screaming orders at people and suggests that he would sexually assault Madison and Mick after she's already been sexually assaulted to another cop. It's like, what the fuck is wrong with you? How are you a cop? But it's fun because it's Ron Perlman being over the top, and Ron Perlman, if you've seen him in the last decade, seems very tired these days. So it's nice seeing the old Ron Perlman, the play it too big Ron Perlman that was in Blade 2. Or even Hellboy. So yeah, very fun, very entertaining, over the top early 90s. This is very much an early 90s creature feature. It's got a lot of special effects, a lot of action. It's, you know, very much in that vein of stuff like People Under the Stairs or In the Mouth of Madness. In the Mouth of Madness is way better, but just those movies, those early 90s. Man's Best Friend is another example of that. I wouldn't say Pumpkinhead. Pumpkinhead is really more of an 80s film and how it feels and how it's constructed. But yeah, Sleepwalkers, I kind of like this movie. Tonight I felt like watching something really low effort, and I was working on my taxes, so I had a headache and my eyes hurt, and I wanted to watch something that I could just turn on and turn my brain off, and Sleepwalkers is absolutely that. It's a movie that's just kind of fun to watch, and it's over before you know it. So I will update again next Wednesday, and that's all I got. See you.